Hello, Kimmerhashiv. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at how to create a really vibrant, impactful hair colour. And we'll put more effort into this than the other parts of the model in order to make it a bit of a feature and give your eyes something to focus on. We're going to start off with quite a dark colour, and we'll make that by mixing a bit of this Chimera Magenta into some Chimera Phthalo Blue. Again, you don't need to use these specific paints. Any magenta and dark blue is going to work just as well. And that's going to give us this really nice dark violet colour, which we'll use to block in the hair, being careful to get a nice even coverage of the paint. So it's a good idea to apply this over a couple of thin layers to ensure you get a clean finish and that you don't lose any details. Once you finish, it should look something like this. You can see the face suddenly looks a lot better now that we've framed it with a darker colour. To continue, we're going to create our first highlight, and we'll do that by adding some of this scale colour Caribbean blue into the mix, giving us this lighter purpley tone. We'll paint that onto the rounded parts of the hair along the side of the head, leaving that dark colour in the centre parting and towards the tips of the hair. Don't worry too much about blending this out, but be sure to leave a bit of a gap both at the top of the head and at the bottom of the hair. We'll be using this in just a moment. Notice I'm also ignoring the sculpted hair detail at this early stage. It's more important that we create some volume in the hair first, then we can pick out the details later. When you're painting this layer, try to think about where the light would be hitting the surface. The side of the head is essentially a cylindrical shape, so if the light is coming down from above at a slight angle, it's going to hit the hair along the length of that cylinder. So here at the rounded part of the head. On the ponytail, it's going to hit near the top part. So we'll try to build up our highlights so it's more intense in this area here. Apply another layer of that same colour, but this time you're going to try and soften out the edges of the highlight just by painting in some of the hair detail at the trailing edge of your layer. So here along the top of the head, I'm painting in some of the hairs towards the centre parting. And notice I'm not making these all the same length. That will help to add some interest while also giving you a more lifelike feel. We'll do the same sort of thing along the bottom edge of the highlight, painting in some of the strands. This allows us to create a blend between the two colours simply by picking out the texture of the surface around the periphery of the highlight. Next, we're going to take a bit more Caribbean blue and add it into our mix, creating more of a bluish pastel tone. For this layer, we're still going to be trying to emphasise the shape of the hair to build up the volume, but this time we'll use more of a textured approach, painting vertical lines along the length of the hair. When you're doing this, try to vary the length of your lines so that they're not all exactly the same. And you're going to do this over a number of layers to build up opacity, while trying to be conscious of making the colour more intense along this line running down the side of the head. So when you're applying the paint, just try to add more of it around that central area where you want the highlight to be more intense. Now, as the hair is essentially the same shape on both sides, from now on I'm just going to paint on one side and then finish the other off cam, just to save a bit of time and stop you getting bored. I don't think it's helpful to see both sides if it's just going to be a repeat of the same thing. To continue, just like with the initial highlight, pick out some of the individual hairs at the top of the head, near the centre parting, using the texture to help blend out the layers. Here you can see the effect we've created is a fairly solid highlight running along the side of the head and a more obvious texture towards the top and bottom. Also, note that the highlight isn't a rigid band of colour, there's some variability to it. The shape is a little irregular. That's what you're looking for, because hair naturally has quite a lot of dynamics to it in terms of shape. So it's good to try and emulate that by not making your highlights too regimented. Once you're happy with that, add a bit more of the Caribbean blue into the mix, shifting the colour more towards an obvious turquoise. Now you're going to add another layer, but this time we'll begin to target the sculpted texture of the hair. Again, trying to remain conscious of this imaginary line running along the side of the head, making the paint more opaque along that same line. Notice we're working with quite a thin consistency throughout. That's so it's easier to create a gradient into the highlight. By applying multiple layers, we're better able to increase the intensity of the colour until we reach full opacity. If you find that the highlight is still a little obvious at the edges, you can add some water to your mix, thinning it down to a glaze consistency. Then, with a very small amount on the brush, gently draw the side of the bristles up and over the edge, doing this over a few layers in order to soften out the transition, being sure to let each layer dry before applying a new one. To continue, we're going to take some of the Caribbean blue on its own and we're going to add another highlight layer. Again, keeping the paint thin and targeting the sculpted detail running along that line at the side of the head. Notice that we've been gradually increasing the saturation of the colour over a number of layers. If we just tried to brighten that initial base colour without first boosting the intensity or vibrancy of the colour, it would just end up quite flat. If you want a bright result, you need to think in terms of building the saturation first, before moving on to your brighter highlights. Alright, so I decided at this point that the shadow between the hairs would be a bit too dark. It looks okay right now, but once we add in our brighter highlights, it will end up looking a lot darker. So to correct this, I'll apply another layer of the Caribbean blue, actually along the recesses between the hairs, just to brighten the colour up slightly. That's probably enough now. The next issue we have is that the highlight has gotten a little harsh along the edges. So we'll again thin the highlight down to a glaze consistency with a bit of water. Then we'll use that to soften out the trailing end of the transition. Just gently pulling the bristles up and over the edge, moving it in the direction of the highlight. Doing this over a few layers in order to soften out the transition, being sure to let each layer dry before applying a new one. Once you're happy, take some scale colour white sands and mix it into the Caribbean blue to lighten it. Again, keeping the paint quite thin, we'll start to boost the brightness of the highlight, targeting the middle part, running along the side of the head. And we'll also try to place them so that they're not all uniform. If you create a subtle zigzag pattern, you tend to get a more interesting effect. You can make that really exaggerated or more subtle, it's up to you. Again, you want to build this up over a few layers until you get the colour nice and bright. To continue, we'll add a bit more of the white sands into the mix, making it really quite bright this time. And we'll go back and apply that right in the centre of the brightest part of our highlight. You can see that uneven placement of the highlight coming through now. I think it's pretty effective. To finish that off, we're going to take some of the white sand on its own, and we're just going to pick out one of the highlights and apply a single tiny dot right in the middle of it. Applying only one gives you a good effect because it creates a focal point and it's actually more compelling than if you place it in all of the highlights. Alright, so here's how it looks after finishing the other side. I think it looks pretty cool. I'll leave you here for now, but I hope to see you all in the next video. Thanks again. Bye for now.